Would you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Something is definitely going on. There's some kind of shared existential energy swirling around the universe, and it keeps popping up in my inbox. Maybe you've had this experience. You start thinking about something. In fact, you can't stop thinking about something, and suddenly see it popping up all around you. It's that song playing when you turn on the car radio. It's that newspaper clipping that your mother sent you. Thanks, Mom. It's on that church sign that you walk on your way to work. And suddenly you realize that the something you've been fixating on isn't just yours. The universe is clearly obsessing about it too. For me this season, in case you haven't noticed, the thing is hope. Earlier this summer, as our worship team began reflecting on the story we wanted to tell this fall, the energy of hope just wouldn't let us go. No matter where we took the conversation, hope met us there. And in the weeks and months that followed, it just kept following me around. And here's a sample from my email inbox just this week. An online Pathos article called "Hold On to Hope in These Trying Times." A new Christian Century book series called "Living with Hope." An invitation to a neighbor's art show with the theme, "A Climate of Hopefulness." The outline of a friend's Bible study called "The Gospel of Hope." And here's the kicker, a Facebook post from one of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, entitled "Show Up with Hope, a Plan for Facing Adversity." It's an excerpt from an article she wrote for National Geographic. National Geographic, a magazine I never really thought of as in the hope business. Hopefulness is clearly a tenacious little bugger, and it is trying to get our attention. And thank goodness for that, because we need it to keep showing up these days. As Anne Lamott writes in the aforementioned article, you would almost have to be nuts to be filled with hope in a world so rife with hunger and hatred, climate change and pestilence, let alone the self-destructive behavior of certain people who we will not name. Yet in the midst of all of this, she writes, I have boundless hope most of the time. She describes hope as a cranky optimism, a tenacious trust that no matter how dire things look, no matter how long the rescue or the healing might take, there are forces in the world that come together for good. Modern medical science, for example, and helpful neighbors, the passage of time, random kindness run amok, and oh yeah, our dogs, definitely our dogs. Because she's writing for National Geographic, Lamont is going rather light on the spiritual stuff here, but I've read enough of her to know that what she means by tenacious trust is faith, and what she means by kindness run amok is grace. Hope is all of that. But Lamont doesn't let hope get swallowed up in sentimentality. This cranky optimism she speaks of is not wishful thinking. It's not vague thoughts and prayers. It's hardcore. It doesn't sit on the sidelines posting soft focus memes of sunrises. It gets out the flashlight and starts looking. It rolls up its sleeves and digs for it, unearthing hope in those hard-to-reach places, the ones that look papered over with despair. And because of this tenacity, hope is a powerful force. It connects us to one another. It shows us what's possible. It's the beckoning of God's finger luring us towards wholeness in a broken world. But as Val said this morning, we cannot be passive about it. We cannot wait for hope to find us. The Reverend William Barber, the head of the North Carolina NAACP, the architect of Moral Mondays, and the prophetic leader of the new Poor People's Campaign, tells the story of how he learned about that kind of hope. He writes, when I was growing up in eastern North Carolina, I used to love to sit in my grandma's kitchen and listen to her sing as she made dinner. Whenever she was done cooking, she'd give me a plate to eat. And then she and some of the other sisters from church would make up some to-go plates, and with their aprons still on, they'd head out the door to visit the sick and the shut-in. "We going to hope somebody," Grandma would say. For years, I thought Grandma's grammar was bad. I studied my lessons in English class, and I knew that hope wasn't a verb. I didn't dare correct Grandma, but I knew better than to say I was going to hope somebody. Years later, after I'd gone to graduate school and read the great theologians, I woke up one morning and I couldn't move. My doctors told me I'd never walk again. There was nothing they could do to help me. Laying on my back in the hospital bed, it struck me that Grandma was a better theologian than I realized. When no one could help me, I needed someone to hope me, he says. Only a revival down on the inside was going to change my circumstances on the outside. God sent an angel to hope me, and something powerful happened. Folks started to get together. My doctors got together with the nurses. My family got together with the therapists. My church got together and figured out how to help me get around. It was a dozen years before I could walk on my own. But the minute I had hope down inside and folks started to come together, Reverend Barber said, I knew I had a future. The force of people coming together is the energy of hope. It's where it's born. It's how God makes a way out of no way through imperfect people like us. We may just be following our best instincts, or faking it, or acting out of desperation. It doesn't matter. Anytime we step up and help God make that way when no way is clear, we are guaranteeing that hope is present. Hope is wading through waist-deep, rushing water on a highway in North Carolina to pull a toddler out of a flooding car. Hope is Emma Gonzalez in Parkland, Florida, issuing a call to action through her tears. Hope is the teacher who gets up every morning in the dark to drive down to the Sussex Avenue School in Newark with new pencils and crayons and snacks in her bag, which she bought herself so that none of her students would do without. Hope is the soft blanket that Reverend Heather brings to new babies born in this church. Hope is the 50 pounds of vegetables our garden has grown for Tony's kitchen. And hope is at the heart of the gospel. For Jesus is constantly stepping into those places of darkness and despair and saying, don't be afraid. He hopes on people all the time. When he multiplies crumbs into feasts and heals the sick and turns water into wine. But he doesn't just keep that hope work to himself. He invites us to step right into it ourselves, like this morning's gospel, for example. Standing on the side of the mountain, looking at all the people who struggle with so many burdens, so many reasons to give up, Jesus says to them, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are the ones who can make all the difference. That's hope talk. And I love that Jesus doesn't ask us only to be bright. I think we get the brightness thing. I love that he also asks us to be salty. Salty often gets a bad rap. But salt is essential for life and health. It adds flavor. It preserves food. It cleans wounds. Salt is the stuff of life. And so are you, Jesus tells his friends. You bring something essential, but only if you keep your saltiness. If you grow stale, you can't be effective any longer. I think hope is a lot like salt. It's the ingredient that can bring out the possibilities in the world. It can preserve us in lean times. It can be the best medicine. But it can fade. It can fade if we let it. By calling his friends salt and light, Jesus is empowering them and us to keep at it, to be active agents of hope in the world no matter how deep the darkness seems. And in order to do that, my friends, we need to create for ourselves laboratories of hope, places where we can learn it and find it and practice it. Places like this church. When we share those gospel stories, when we share our own stories, as Val did this morning, we remember the times when God made a way through people who hoped on us. We are reminded that we are indeed called to embody the possibility and promise of a better world ourselves. And when we see hope alive and kicking in our midst, well, we just have to name it, and we have to celebrate it. In a few minutes here in this church, we will be acknowledging those folks who are both bright and salty, and you know who you are. People who stepped into leadership here because they know that hope is a verb. This is our very own roster of cranky optimists. I'm looking at you, Liz Donald, who are able to look into the challenging reality of this place and still hold on to hope. The ones who roll up their sleeves and take on the work of caring and organizing and budgeting and feeding and repairing and teaching and serving to bring out all the possibilities of God's dream in this church. And that is tenacious faith and grace in abundant measure. That is the flavor of hope. As the universe and my email inbox reminds us, hope is clearly a tenacious little bugger, but it needs us to keep it going. The world can certainly be a dark and despairing place, and the temptation to just let hope fade is real, but that is not who we are called to be. As Anne Lamott says, by creating hope for others, we end up awash in the stuff ourselves. May it be so in this little corner of God's kingdom. May it be so in the world. Amen. Amen.